Okay, everybody, these are literary terms, 12A through 19E. Feel free to pause it. Epigram. A brief, witty statement, often satirical. If we don't end war, war will end us. Epistolary. Letter or diary style of writing. The Color Purple by Alice Walker is an example. This one is actually B. The previous one was C. Epiphany. A sudden thought or moment of realization. Epitaph. A brief statement or verse on a grave or tomb, like what you'd see on a tombstone in a cemetery. Epithet. A description that adds to or helps to develop the meaning. Example from Romeo and Juliet. Death lies on her like an untimely frost upon the sweetest flower of all the field. Okay, moving into 13. Euphony, 13A. Smooth, pleasant sounding choice and arrangement of sounds. From a poem by John Keats. Seasons of mist and mellow fruitfulness. Euphemism. A less offensive substitute for an unpleasant word or concept. Not fat, but voluptuous. Exposition. The background and necessary information. This could be in a novel, a play, a short story, any piece of prose. Extended metaphor. A metaphor developed at great length, usually throughout the work. For example, it could be vengeance in Hamlet. Falling action. The story's slowing of the plot's progression after the climax. In Hamlet, this is probably going to be all of Act 4. Farce. A comedy that makes use of highly exaggerated situations. An example is Oscar Wilde's The Importance of Being Earnest, or William Shakespeare's The Taming of the Shrew. Stanzas can have a certain number of feet per line, and remember, generally a foot is going to be a stressed and unstressed syllable, sort of as a general rule, although there are exemptions to that. So 1 foot per line is monometer, 2 feet per line is dimeter, 3 feet per line is trimeter, 4 feet per line is tetrameter, 5 per line, pentameter, 6 feet per line, hexameter, 7 feet per line, heptameter, 8 feet per line, octameter. This one's a pretty common one for multiple choice on the AP exam. There are 2 kinds of specific rhyme. One is feminine rhyme, and that is where the repeated accented vowel is either the second or, that's a typo, I'm sorry everybody, or third last syllable, and often it's an ing word. For example, enticing and indicing. Compare that to masculine rhyme. A figure, often called a trope. A word or phrase used in a way that changes its standard or literal meaning. Pardon me, I've got some typos from the ofs and the ors. Example, irony, hyperbole, metonymy, from Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. Two households, both alike in dignity. And that's a trope because it is obviously ironic that he says they're alike in dignity when the Capulets and the Montagues are fighting at the beginning of the play, and neither one of them shows any dignity at any point in time throughout the play because of their fights until the very end when their children are dead. Fixed form, this will be for poetry. And that's where a poem's pattern and length are prescribed. And this would include things like a sonnet, a limerick, a haiku, even a villanelle. Okay, we are on 15a. A flat character is one that has limited moral qualities, meaning we really only see one side of the character. You see only their bad side, with the assumption that possibly there's something good to them, but if so, you don't see that in the work. A foil or a foil character is a character that parallels another character, and they're not opposites necessarily. Sometimes you look at a foil as a mirror image, like one character's persona sort of highlights the opposite persona in another character, or it just simply highlights it so that you'll see it. So again, they don't have to be polar opposites. A foot is the basic unit of an accented syllable and one or two unaccented syllables. And so in that, remember, it'll be either stressed or unstressed. And often the symbols for that is a stress is like a straight up and down parallel line, and an unstressed syllable is shown by an X. So if you see the parallel line and an X, that's called a trochee because that's accent and unaccented. Think the dum, and then a spondee is too stressed, dum dum, and that would be in poetry. A frame story is a story within a story. The Canterbury Tales, each pilgrim story is a frame story, and each story has a prologue or an introduction, and then the story itself. And we're actually going to be looking at an example of one of these in the next couple of days. And you might also consider the play within the play of Hamlet to be sort of a frame story. You could maybe even call it a frame play, and then make sure if you were writing about it that you referred to it as a frame play or a play within the play in Hamlet. And that would be the Murder of Gonzago / the Mousetrap within Hamlet. Free verse, sometimes referred to as open form, is poetry without dictated rules. And so remember, the fallback is to say that something is probably going to be lyric poetry if it has a single speaker. If it doesn't have a whole lot of rules in terms of rhyming or meter, then you're probably going to call it free verse or open form. Those can be used interchangeably. Genre is a category of writing. Major genres would be like novel and then drama. And then what I would call a subgenre would then be a mystery novel or a historical novel or historical fiction. And then drama, it could be a comedy, a tragedy, a history, all of that being genre. A haiku is a fixed form poem that has 3 lines. The syllables are 5 syllables, then 7 syllables, then 5 syllables. And it's a Japanese originating poem, and generally these relate to nature. You'll occasionally find some that do not, but most of them will be sort of a pastoral haiku, if you will. A heroic couplet. So it's a stanza consisting of 2 rhyming lines in iambic pentameter. So a lot of what you see with Shakespeare will be heroic couplets. But romantic poets like Byron, like Lord Byron, also use these quite a lot. So an example, know then thyself, presume not God to scan. New line, the proper study of mankind is man. And so think about the syllables there. Know then thyself, presume not God to scan. The proper study of mankind is man. A homily, probably more often than not in literature, it'll be called an exemplum. It's a sermon or speech in a work, and usually it's pretty serious, and it'll be a part where a character, usually just a single character, will go off on a very specific moral sort of speech where they're really driving home the point of the story or the play or the work. Hubris. This goes back to ancient Greek literature. And it's extreme arrogance. And so it was especially noted over the gods in mythology, like where a mortal thought they were more important than one of the Greek or even the Roman gods. So an example would be in the Oedipus trilogy, that Oedipus believing that he could overstep the prophecy. And in Oedipus, Oedipus was told that he would kill his father and marry his mother. And he spends his whole life trying to avoid that by running away. And in the end, he cannot. And he unwittingly and unknowingly does kill his father, whom he didn't realize was his father, and does marry his mother, and ends up like blind and in exile because of it. Hyperbole. That's an extreme exaggeration. I'm so thirsty, I drank the lake. I'm so hungry, I could eat a horse. All of those really cliche statements. So don't use these in writing. An idyll. It's a kind of poem that is simple in depicting a pastoral or rustic scene of country life. You might even consider a passionate shepherd to his love to be both a pastoral and an idyll. Imagery. Remember, that's your fallback in writing about poetry. I would start with imagery and then try to move to something more specific if you're writing, but if you truly don't know where to start, then start with imagery. And it's just sensory detail. It could be visual detail. It could be olfactory, smelling. It could be any sort of spoken detail. So imagery can be any of the senses. In media res, which means literally in the middle, and it's a story or text that doesn't start at the beginning, where you either have to find out what happened later, or you're told that backstory as the story progresses, or you're not told at all. And kind of like there not being a resolution, there would be no beginning if it was in media res. An inference. A reasonable conclusion made from a statement. So it's just a logical conclusion that you can make. Internal and end rhyme. Internal is a rhyme within a line. Example, once upon a midnight dreary while I pondered weak and weary. And then end rhyme at the ends of lines. Oh, if only I could recall there on the heath nearest trees tall. An invective, which is just simply a verbal attack. And so if you have two characters that are going after each other, you might think of, say, Romeo and Juliet at that portion of the play at the beginning where we're attacking Tybalt. That could be an invective, especially the verbal part when it starts to go to, fist and fighting with hands, and it's not so much an invective anymore. An inverted sentence. And rather than subject plus verb, its syntax is verb plus subject. There lived the old couple. So like a more, I guess, common syntax would be the old couple lived there. So inverted, there lived the old couple. And obviously it gives you pause, plus it's a little maybe more, an older form of writing probably is where you'll see inverted sentences, especially 15th, 16th, 17th century poetry. Light verse. And that's poetry without the intense rhyme or focus. And that would be, again, poetry that it'd be probably more like a lyric that doesn't have specific patterns or rules. What we might just call a simple poem is light verse. It will also not be about over like a serious subject. Limerick. An Irish riddle-like poem, and they're usually harmonious, and a lot of times these are jokes. A lyric poem. This kind of poem expresses more emotion than a story. It's usually a single speaker, and the poem has a sense of rhythm, but doesn't have prescribed rhyme. It can have meter, though. And so examples of a lyric would be like an elegy, an ode, sometimes sonnets, even though, again, we'll keep in mind that those have prescribed forms. So these are all types of lyric poetry. So lyric is more of the all-encompassing term for it. And then an elegy would be, one that's written to mourn the death or loss of someone. An ode is written to someone or in honor of a particular thing, like in nature, the sun. And a sonnet being the same thing. It's written about someone or something. But remember, in the sonnet, it has a fixed form. Malapropism. A mistaken use of a word in place of a correct term. So, like if someone were to write about a flamingo dance, when in reality, the correct way to spell and say that is flamenco dance. So flamingo dance, unless you're talking about pink birds, is not the correct thing to say. So that would be a malapropism. Masculine rhyme. Compare this one to the previous feminine rhyme. Where the repeated accented syllable of the words involved. And it looks like I forgot to write down an example here. There are all sorts of literary terms, dictionaries out there. So you could look up masculine rhyme and compare it to feminine to be able to see the difference. Like I said, College Board does really like to ask about masculine or feminine rhyme. Maybe it might be like one question, but it's worth your effort to make sure you know the difference between those two. And Angie does not speak French very well, but mise en scène, which means sparse stage backgrounds and few props. And I haven't decided which short comedy we're going to do, but if we do one called Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, that, yes, is RNG from Hamlet. And it's really centered upon just the characters. And they don't often use any sort of backgrounds. And it's really just the characters and the costumes that they're wearing. And the last one in this set, 19E, is metaphor. Obviously, a comparison of two seemingly unlike things. Remember, the only difference between metaphor and simile will be simile using the word like or as, and metaphor not. And there can be an extended metaphor throughout a work. There is no such thing as an extended simile. Okay, guys, that's the end of 19. I'll add some more later.